Part 1. Peaceful Sedition. 1. The purpose is not. Many books, articles, and scholarly papers will begin with some kind of statement of the case, an introduction to the topic, or a synopsis of the concept being proposed. Additionally, the underlying purpose of almost every such writing is to convert someone to or convince someone of the author's viewpoint. I won't be doing that. First and foremost, the purpose of this field manual is not to convert or convince anyone of anything. This manual is written for those who already accept its premise and are, or soon will be, actively engaging in matters of the kind or similar to those covered in this manual. The purpose of this manual is to create an overview of why these actions will take place as a record for posterity and to train and prepare those who take such actions to do them as wisely and as safely as possible. Additionally, included in this manual is information that the activist may use to help explain why he or she is taking the path they have chosen to follow. This information is not intended to be an exhaustive work of reference. It is simply a first step in arming and training our friends for the unfortunate and difficult task that is before us. It is intended to be modified and expanded as new information arrives and as the need develops. My only goal in assembling this manual is to share the wisdom I have learned from my own successes and failures over the years, and share that which I have learned from my mentors as well as what I have learned from observing the foolish and their repeated and predictable follies. Those who have a mind to listen and apply my words to their activism will do so by their choice, not because of a sales tactic or some emotional plea. The truth of my words will ring in their ears like a tuning fork to the musician, or it will miss altogether. So, if you thought you could use this book as an evangelical tool to give to your friends to convince them that roads can exist without government, you are mistaken. This is not an introduction to libertarian thought, nor is it an anarchist primer. This is a field manual for winning a war against the enemy of humanity, the state. Just for the record, I am a grandfather, I am a Quaker, I am a minister, and I am bound by no oath of allegiance. I am not a pacifist, however, I respect pacifists and would never try to persuade them to change. I believe in the zero aggression principle, and I believe I have a responsibility to protect myself and those closest to me with whatever means, including violent and even deadly measures, as the need arises. As a Quaker, I feel no obligation to attempt to convert anyone to any viewpoint. Therefore, I do not support evangelism, neither on religious nor philosophical topics. I believe every thinking adult should know what they believe and why they believe it, and I believe every thinking adult should be prepared to explain their beliefs in a logical and consistent manner. Likewise, I don't believe in any obligation to explain anything to anyone. If I choose to speak, I will speak the truth as I know it. If you choose to heed my words, then do so. If my words offend you, don't read them. For the last 38 years, I have resisted, opposed, or openly fought the state as best as I could with the knowledge and resources I had at my disposal. Much of those efforts were misguided and wrong-headed. Some were downright foolish. I often took the route proposed by those most influential in the moment at the time. Thus, I voted for prominent libertarian leaders, donated to their campaigns and causes, bought their books, attended their speeches, supported their websites and institutes, and generally parroted what they thought. I embraced counter-economics and agorism by living entirely off-grid in the Mojave Desert while supporting myself through black market activity and paying as little in taxes as possible. I ran an above-ground, unlicensed business in Reno, Nevada, in a highly regulated industry. I taught myself hacking techniques and ran an MP3 sharing server on a NASA computer before Napster existed. I took my children out of school and rejected the homeschooling curriculum before the word unschooling was invented. In short, if a libertarian or a market anarchist has taught a method for obtaining freedom, I have either tried it or I have closely observed others trying it. It is with this body of experience that I present my conclusion. This so-called liberty movement is doing it wrong. With the exception of some Bitcoin activists and some computer hackers, those people most celebrated with fame and recognition in the liberty movement are usually deeply committed to one or two of the four conventional strategies that have been proven over and over to be either marginally successful at best or outright counterproductive. More on the four conventional strategies later. Typically, this fact is ignored by the wide-eyed followers of those dynamic personalities that flutter about selling these worn-out methods. Therefore, we have this field manual, not for those still transfixed by the celebrity libertarian evangelists, nor those with their minds stuck in dusty old books and worn-out methods, but for those who have come to the same conclusion that I have, doing the same things over and over, expecting different results, while viciously defending old failed methods, is both foolish and tiresome to watch. I expect most people who begin to read this book will reject it outright as soon as they realize that the premise is to not only encourage specific violent actions, but to teach peaceful people how and when to safely and wisely commit those actions. Of course, I am speaking of staying within the zero aggression principle, and I am talking about respecting individual private property, but I'm also specifically addressing the fictions of public property and government property, and I'm talking about violent and sometimes bloody self-defense, along with disciplined preemptive self-defense. Over the last 150 years, a number of well-known anarchists have advocated some type of violence as a method of achieving freedom, including several prominent libertarian or market-type anarchists from as early as the 1960s. However, in each case, there was some flaw in either principle or in method of execution. Perhaps their plan was vague, or it depended upon some rounding up cattle car type government actions to spark the event, or perhaps there was a blaring lack of forethought and wisdom in the planning, or it depended on revolution, which, as history plainly shows, only results in a new government. So without dwelling on failures of the past, and in order to develop a plan for victory, we must consider that people are different, and there is no dishonor in that difference. The vast majority of liberty activists are and should remain peaceful. They should endeavor to develop self-control in the face of oppression and resist the urge to lash out at captors. Again, there is no dishonor in peacefulness. The first section of this manual is aimed at that majority of activists, the ones I refer to as the above ground. Then again, there are those who simply cannot control their urge to physically resist the authoritarians. Perhaps they aren't suited for actual warfare, but they certainly cannot restrain their actions to the realm of speech. This group of activists are the ones who should take careful note of the next section of this manual titled Simple Sabotage. And then there is the tiny minority that do not fit in either of the above categories. They are the few who need to read the final section of this manual titled Irregular Warfare. Thus we have this 3-part field manual that you hold before you. It is not for everyone. It is targeted at those who need to read it, and all others should openly and loudly denounce it. Every above-ground activist that reads this book should, after finishing it, proclaim it heresy, deny its validity, and then pass it on to that one person you know that needs it. 2. Definitions. Any complex conversation worth having should first rest upon a set of definitions. No debate, no agreement, and no lasting trust can be secured without the parties involved understanding the definitions of the words being used. The following definitions will be used throughout the 3 parts of this field manual, not so that you can like or agree with these definitions, but so that the definitions in the context of this manual can be consistently understood. 2-1. Sedition. Sedition is overt conduct or speech inciting or provoking people to rebel or resist authority, especially that of the state or of a specific governing body. In other words, it is that which happens within plain sight of our enemy. Sedition can involve violent or nonviolent actions or speech. 2-1.1 Propaganda. Generally, propaganda is information, especially of a biased nature, used to promote a cause or point of view. The word propaganda typically carries with it the assumption that something is false or misleading. This doesn't have to be the case. Propaganda can be false or entirely true, but what makes propaganda different from other forms of communication is that propaganda is information used specifically to change the way people think or to move the conversation in a specific direction. 2-2 Subversion. Subversion is an attempt to transform the established social order and its structures of power, authority, and hierarchy. Subversion refers to a process by which the values and principles of a system in place are questioned, contradicted, or reversed, usually through underhanded processes as opposed to open belligerency. In other words, it is that which happens without our enemy seeing. Subversion can involve violent or nonviolent actions or speech. 2-3 Sabotage. Sabotage is a deliberate action aimed at weakening a polity or corporation through subversion, obstruction, disruption, or destruction. Sabotage can range from intentionally doing poorly at a job to creating a disruptive atmosphere among workers by questioning managers to actively destroying property. The word sabotage has its roots in the practice of peasant workers shoving their shoes into the gears of factories. Sabotage can involve violent or nonviolent actions or speech. 2-3.1 Friend Saboteur. A fellow anarchist/abolitionist/voluntarist who embraces the zero-aggression principle and rejects all forms of coercive slavery while actively employing the methods of simple sabotage in resistance of the state and its actors. 2-4 Ethics-based irregular warfare. Irregular warfare favors indirect and asymmetric warfare approaches, though it may employ the full range of military and other capabilities in order to erode an adversary's power, influence, and will. It is often defined as a protracted struggle by an indigenous people testing the resolve of an occupying government and its strategic partners. It can take the form of insurgency or terrorism, but does not necessarily manifest itself as such in all cases. Ethics-based irregular warfare rejects the use of violence against the non-combatant and their property and favors strategic selective engagement with those considered highly valued or highly aggressive targets. 2-5 Insurgency. An insurgency is a struggle against authority when those taking part in the struggle are not universally recognized as belligerents. Insurgents are often indigenous people resisting the existing authority or government. An insurgency can involve violent or nonviolent actions or speech. 2-6 The State. In the context of this manual, the state is capitalized as a personal pronoun rather than its simple legal definition as a noun. The state is the entity/deity, real or imagined, that all aspects of all coercive governments, along with key corporations, the central banking complex, the mainstream media, the mainstream intelligentsia, and mainstream clergy serve as their master. This includes the so-called shadow governments and all those behind the scenes who intentionally facilitate the dominance of humanity through the use of violence and threats of violence, coupled with theft and lies. One could say the state is the mystical character, angelus, of the body politic. 2-7 The Great Man. The concept of the great man was heavily debated and debunked in the 1800s, but the belief is as old as the state itself and is more widely accepted today than ever. The basic idea is that God, or nature's God, provides special great men at specific times to lead society or governments during crisis or to advance the progress of humanity towards a greater civilization. In reality, the great man theory is nothing but the old divine right of kings, myth modified with modern terminology. The other half of the great man theory that is rarely addressed is the boogeyman. He is the opposite of the great man. He is standing in the shadows, always waiting to take over and destroy civilization as soon as people fail to follow the great man. He is Hannibal at the gates. He is the next Hitler. He is the great Satan, always poised to steal men's minds and souls, held at bay only by the wisdom and bravery of the great man. In American politics, the great man/boogeyman has developed into an art form. Every 4 years, a macabre opera is played out at the cost of billions of dollars, almost $7 billion in 2012, according to OpenSecrets.org, as the American people attempt to determine who will be the great man and who will fail to raise to the calling. Of course, the whole idea of the great man/boogeyman is pure poppycock and is the invisible thread that holds together the emperor's new clothes. The moment you realize there is no great man and there is no boogeyman, the emperor's clothing vanishes and you see him for the tiny wart-covered leech that he is. 2-8 Centralized, decentralized, and distributed networks. The standard definitions are used in this case based on the 121-page paper Paul Baran wrote for the Rand Corporation in 1964. In brief summary, imagine a bicycle wheel with spokes protruding from a central hub. Now remove the tire and rim, leaving only the hub in the middle with the spokes protruding outward. At the end of each spoke is an activist. This would be a centralized network of activists. All the activists are connected to the same central hub. If anything happens to the hub, the entire network is affected. Now imagine 5 or 10 or any other number of small hubs with some spokes on each hub connecting to the other hubs. All of the hubs can function independently, so if one hub is taken out of the network still mostly functions. But in taking out the one hub, you have also taken out all of the spokes and activists that depended on that hub. This is a decentralized network of activists. It is more reliable than a centralized network, but still relies on hubs. Now imagine all the hubs are gone, leaving only spokes and activists. The activists connect not to one spoke and one hub, but each activist has 2 to 5 spokes or more, each connected to other activists. No activist is a hub, and yet all activists are hubs. No one activist depends solely on another activist, while all activists are within 2 or 3 connections from any other activist. This is a distributed network of activists. The word activist is used here, but the concept is the same if you use the word computer or telephone or soup can. 2-9. Activism/activist. Some very small-minded people believe activism is narrowly defined as only including the activity that they approve of. Others believe that any action you take, no matter the intent or outcome, is positive activism that should be praised and supported. I call both those types of people stupid. If you take action, you are an activist. Your activism may be useful or useless. It may be wise or foolish. It may be dramatic or calming. It may do what you expect or it may not. Talking is activism. Posting catchy pictures with snappy sayings on social media is activism. Handcuffing yourself to the door of a police station is activism. Pouring gasoline on your head and igniting it on the courthouse steps is activism. Activism is not defined by the intent nor the result of the action. Activism is defined as action taken for a purpose. Judging the wisdom or the efficacy of the activism is a completely different matter. 2-10. Slacktivism. Some newer definitions for slacktivism are derogatory perversions of its original meaning. For the purposes of this manual, slacktivism is defined closer to its original positive meaning. This manual defines slacktivism, for example, in an employment setting as intentionally doing a really bad job while not doing anything bad enough to get fired. A specific example of slacktivism would be a trash collector who only half empties the trash cans of select customers for the purpose of disrupting the day-to-day functions of that specific customer. Or a waiter could find himself too busy helping one customer with minor issues to attend to the basic needs of an important customer who is the target of the slacktivism. In customer service, a slacktivist may waste the target's time going over details, having them repeat information, apologizing over and over while either not solving the target's problem or taking longer than required to solve it. In the immortal words of Homer Simpson, "Lisa, if you don't like your job, you don't go on strike, you just go in every day and do it really half-assed." 2-11. Corporation. According to the United States government, U.S. Small Business Administration, a corporation, is an independent legal entity. This means that the corporation itself is held legally liable for the actions and debts of the business. Additionally, the Supreme Court of the United States has ruled that a corporation is a legal person. The legal person status of corporations give the business perpetual life. Deaths of officials or stockholders do not alter the corporation. And the SCOTUS has ruled that corporations, like humans, have certain rights that are protected by the U.S. Constitution. I may not like this definition, and you may not like this definition. Too bad. This is how the U.S. government sees it, and most other governments largely agree. Therefore, this is how the word will be used in this manual. You may like corporations or you may hate them. It doesn't matter. 3. Know your enemy, know yourself. 3-1. Your enemy, the faithful and obedient.